This is the Audience Connection podcast, where we hear from the best content strategists and storytellers in the industry about how to create content that builds audience connection. I'm your host, Lydia Chan. We are sponsored by Casual, the video partner for global businesses. With offices in the US, EMEA, and APAC, Casual lives and breathes storytelling, creating impactful stories on a global scale with a local touch. Welcome back to the Audience Connection podcast. I'll tee up today's episode by asking these questions. As podcast listeners, have you ever wondered why, maybe we trust what we hear more than what we see? Or why does audio sometimes feel so much more personal at times? Well, today we explore the answers to those questions because my guest is Cliff Chiet, who is the Chief Integrated Marketing Director at iHeartMedia, which is the largest audio company in America. Cliff answers those whys by touching on the neuroscience behind audio's emotional impact and why podcasts are now twice as trusted as any other medium. This conversation is packed with insights on audience behavior, marketing psychology, and the future of storytelling. We also talk about how brands can use audio to drive real business outcomes, from awareness to search to action. After listening to this episode, you should come away feeling like, yeah, I need to tap into audio if you are not utilizing this channel already. So if you care about connecting with your audience in a more human way, you're going to want to listen all the way through. Let's jump right in. Okay, today we are talking about all things audio. And who better to talk about the topic than Cliff Chiet, Chief Integrated Marketing Director at iHeartMedia. Cliff, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Lydia, thank you so much for having me. I hope I can do justice to all the exciting things happening in the audio industry.
Sweet. All right. So let's just start with a brief intro on your background for our audience and really what drew you to audio specifically.
Well, it's ironic because a lot of people say I talk more than I listen. So for me to be in a listening world was probably very therapeutic for me. My background, I've always been in media. I've had a long career in publishing. So back in the days when there were these newspapers that got black ink on your fingers and magazines, I really look back to my college days where I actually studied radio. And I was doing radio back in the days when it wasn't as technologically savvy. But it's like fast forward all these years later, I end up in something I studied in college. And I think what happened is people started changing their habits with publishing. You know, reading newspapers, reading magazines. They were choosing different ways to consume their content, and I wanted to go where the ball was being thrown. Yeah, I had a little bit of concern about going from kind of one dying media to another. And the first question I asked when I came over to iHeart was, do people still listen to radio? And the answer was there are more people listening now than there were 20 years ago. And they showed me actually a third-party chart survey that had been done that basically showed the trends of radio have never dipped below 90% since the 70s, that people have been listening and they have been engaged with radio, contrary to what people might think, with other things like Sirius and Pandora and streaming devices. People always come right back to radio.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Like I, y- I listen to the radio on my drive to, whether it's the gym or to work, and I kind of feel like an oldie, like I'm aging myself because I listen to the radio. But
Old soul.
really, it's like I guess in my mind, it feels like a resurgence. But sort of what you're saying is that it's always been around and it's actually never dipped and is a growing segment. Like
It
how
is, and yeah.
Yeah, what I guess what was causing that perception, maybe. Can you talk a little bit about the audience, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of people that feel because of their own habits that everyone else has the same habits. And so therefore, when you look at, Sirius, you would think, oh, everyone has Sirius. Well, there's a cost to it. And the fact of the matter is that only 4% in their cars, are listening to Sirius. People would think that everybody's listening to it because they do. So the main population, because when you really think of the United States, we on the East Coast or those on the West Coast, might consume media differently, but everyone in between the earmuffs of those two coasts, you know, are like having something they can go to that they don't have to get charged for, and that they can be entertained and they could have companionship. And I
Yeah.
think that's really the misperception is that, because, these streaming devices are out, I don't need to go to, or have an appetite for radio anymore. I always say everyone's favorite radio station is WIFM, What's in it for me?
Mm.
And I think a lot of people love to get something out of their listening experience and not have to work too hard and not always listen to the same stuff that they always listen to habitually gets old after a while, and they want to be introduced to new things. So, new stories, new content, new music that's coming on the rise. I don't care what anybody tells you, but you haven't arrived as a musician until your song is on the radio. To this day, you could stream, you can have all these followers, you can have all these downloads, but to legitimize yourself as a recording artist, just like Elvis, when your song plays on the radio, there's nothing more validating, for an artist. And 70% of all new music is discovered on radio.
Yeah. So maybe talk a little about that generationally, right? So, we have a lot of um, brands, a lot of clients, a lot of corporations trying to engage with, say, Gen Z, right? So, is there a generational difference in the listener profile when not even radio, right? Or rather music when it comes to podcasts or, audio stories? Is there a separation of like generation in regards to who's listening?
Well, the fastest growing listeners are the young audience.
Mm,
Because, again, people are on budgets, tight budgets.
yeah.
And, when you start adding up all these streaming services that, they add up. So if you can find a way to consume your audio experience without having to shell out the money, I think a lot more are gravitating towards radio. And remember, radio is just one platform of audio. So what's evolved is that there's no other medium in the world that you can go from device to device to device and listen and continue to consume on the go. Everything else is very difficult to do that, and you shouldn't be watching TV when you're driving.
No.
It's
Though I
it,
see
it's
some people in their cars doing that.
I know, and it's very, very scary. But the fact of the matter is that you can listen to radio, and here's what's really changed the radio industry: that you can be listening in your car, and you're stuck in traffic. There's no shortage of traffic in this country. It's gotten worse than pre-pandemic levels, and people want to feel like my daily commute, which is now, like, all day long. It's no longer just morning and afternoon. Midday is just as busy, but that I can have a companion that I can drive with that, becomes a ritual. Like, I like this person makes me laugh, puts me in a good mood when I go to work, you know? But, for those people that are working from home, they can easily go to their Alexa or their Google Home and play any radio station in the country. And they could say, if you're in Chicago and you moved from Dallas and you still miss your Dallas morning show, you can listen to it and stream it live. It's crazy that you can do that. But I think that people now know that most people don't have an FM radio sitting in their house anymore. I might be an
Yeah.
exception.
I do.
Um, but, for the most part, the invention, the technology that has come about, like the smart speaker, or smart TVs or game consoles, you can stream audio. So, whatever your favorite device is. So, the fact that you can continue to listen when you're not in your car has opened up the field, of people because of that easy access with technology and the abundance of content.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes it just so much more accessible, right? I would love to pivot a little bit to talk about the experience of audio and really the like neurological effect of it, right? Like why is audio so uniquely immersive in your opinion, right? Just from like a cognitive and perhaps even like an emotive perspective. Again, when you think about audiobooks, right? Or podcasts, right? What makes just that medium so immersive?
If you go back to when your parents used to read you bedtime stories, when you hear somebody else telling you a story, it's human nature to love to hear stories and have somebody share stories with you. That's the basis of human existence is, people love to learn and hear from other people. And I think that, the first connection that you have when you're not even born in your mother's womb is the voice of your mom and your dad talking to you, right? And, so there's been neurological studies that have showed how the brain activity spikes when they hear the human voice. When people hear the human voice, there's, music, and you can see the brain activity engaging. But as soon as you hear that human voice, you see the brain activity spike because of the fact that it's instinctual, for us to listen. And I think that the fact that you're doing it and not being distracted by you can't really listen. Like, you could look at, 50 things at one time, right? But when and case in point, when you're watching Netflix, you'll probably have your laptop here and your iPhone here. You'll keep pressing rewind because you missed what they said in the movie or whatever. But it's screen overload. When you're listening, you have to be paying attention. So it becomes more of a one-on-one experience for you to engage. And it's also the retention level is extremely high because of the fact that what is said stays in your head. And most people will say, I heard that, I heard this. And it's funny when you think about how people share information. When somebody goes to a restaurant, very visual. The food, the gourmet, the layout of the food, so much care has been put into it to create a visual experience and a taste experience. But what's the first thing you do when you go to a great restaurant? You wanna tell people about that experience, and you do it by audio. You don't sit there and start showing them videos. You might show, a couple of pictures, but you always back it up with the story. Like, "Oh my god, the service was amazing, and then the guy came and he lit up the whole thing went on fire," and, you're kind of
Yeah.
getting all excited about it. So, people forget that, usually when you tell someone about anything, a movie, you're describing this movie. You're not really sitting there showing them a trailer. So I just think it's really the storytelling aspect of audio that will always bring people around. And I think with audiobooks, it's just the fact that I don't have to work too hard. I don't have to think too hard. I can just relax and let somebody share a story with me. And that's why podcasts have just exploded to the degree they have now.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about podcasts, right? And how, I guess, how brands can really leverage podcasts and any other kind of audio medium to engage with their audience or really as part of their marketing mix.
It's interesting if you think of marketing 101 and you think of the funnel,
Yeah.
with the consideration, awareness, consideration, and, all of the things that happen in the journey of a consumer. Um, Audio captures all those opportunities to work people through the funnel. Not to mention that the natural inclination of audio for a brand is when you say something to me about a brand and you pique my interest, my inclination is to search, either organically or directly. So a lot of people don't think about this, but audio drives search better than anything
Hmm.
because, it's that again, it's like, okay, you're hearing about something, you pique my interest, you're in my head now, and now I want to check you out. So it automatically has a 1-2 prong there. But what's interesting about audio is the fact that, you have this mass one to many um, start to audio where you're influencing all these different people. So in other words, you might be looking at colleges, but your mother hears the ad and she
Hmm.
hears about a special scholarship or whatever it is. And all of a sudden she's telling her son and she's influenced her son, you should check this out. Now she's not the direct person that would be going to the school, but she's influential. Or there might be a recruitment ad running for a company and your best friend has been looking for a job. And so it's
Yeah.
really important to have that one to many that has to be part of the upper funnel of marketing. Okay. But then with digital audio, now, just like display advertising, a brand can use data to really hone in on the eardrums of the people that have the highest propensity to be their customer.
Mm.
And that can be down to zip codes. It could be down to, women who have kids that are in elementary school. It could be down to where they shop. Where do they
Yeah.
go? What do they gym enthusiasts? Are they sports enthusiasts, So you have all these data points now with audio that never existed before where you can do one to one. So when you combine the one to many and the one to one of audio, a brand basically we can create that likability, that engagement, but then really drive down to the audience that has the highest propensity to care about them. So when it comes to podcasts, if you have this ability to reach people who are the audience, as opposed to targeting a podcast, you target where that audience, it doesn't matter what they're listening to. So
Hmm.
one of the mistakes that a lot of brands make is they figure, okay, we're a financial company, so therefore we're only going to market ourselves in financial podcasts. But sometimes you
Everyone
got
needs
these,
finances.
right. Well, the thing is that a lot of people who are thinking about finances, you know, they're your target audience, but they also like crime podcasts and they like comedy and they like sports and they like music. So if there's somebody that has a certain net worth and you're a money manager and you want to reach somebody that has, a household income of $500,000 a year, then we can reach those people and it doesn't matter what they're listening to because they're the right audience for you.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that we educate brands on is that don't just focus on your vertical. Focus on the audience that has the highest propensity and the wherewithal to be a client of yours.
Yeah.
And then I always describe it as catch them in their happy place,
Hmm.
in their favorite podcast. And you know what? There's a truth to this. If you support things that I like you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really great, right? And I think what's really great about podcasts as well is just they're these kind of highly engaged micro segments, or they're highly engaged micro audiences. When I think about the podcast that I follow, I mean I'm almost listening to every single episode, right? That's being dropped, and there's this kind of parasocial connection with the host, and all this stuff that really creates a audience that is very curious, is very trusting, I would say. So how would you advise brands to, if they're trying to build an audience with audio, right? How would they go about it? How would they go about building this really highly engaged sort of group of individuals?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said trust. There is so much distrust with marketing with AI, with social media. Audio is 2 times as trustworthy than any other media out there, okay? It's just the nature of the media, okay? So right there, just by doing audio, you're kinda sifting through to an audience that's engaged and that trusts what they're listening to. I would assume that the podcast you listen to, you trust the host,
Yeah.
okay? Because you trust the host, if that host starts talking to you about something, there's gonna be a higher likelihood that you're willing to look into something that the host had recommended. In fact, it's as high as 68% would take a recommendation from a trusted host. So, it's very important to know that in finding an audience for your brand, you wanna reach people that are engaged, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But you also want to be able to be reaching people in trustworthy, podcasts,
Yeah.
and with iHeart in particular, every podcast we do is really the best in its genre, the best comedy, like we have partners in sports, and that we do the NFL's podcast. Bloomberg Financial, we do Bloomberg's podcast. Hollywood elites, Paris Hilton, you
Yeah.
know, if you talk about multicultural, Charlemagne the God
Yeah.
or, Enrique, when it comes to Eva Longoria. She works with us on the Cultura podcast suite that we do of all the, Latinx podcasts. So,
Yeah.
we have all these ways to engage multiculturally, women, men, millennials, Gen Zs, Gen X, everybody with, the nature of the podcast that we have. And I think that people have realized that iHeart, um, our podcasts are the real deal. What most people don't realize is that you're not losing audience because, we're not making people go to the iHeart app to listen to our podcasts. Our podcasts are agnostic to platform. We do a third of Spotify's podcasts. We're in Pandora. We're in Apple. Most of our podcasts are listened to on Apple.
Mhm.
So, we made a very good decision early on that, we don't wanna make people switch from their favorite platform to listen to our podcast. A lot of times people don't even realize they're listening to an iHeart podcast.
Yeah.
But because we're at the publisher level, we own the inventory on all these platforms, and we're able to, have people brands reach their audiences no matter what platform they listen to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's so hard to adopt a different app, right? I mean, we're just all creatures of habit. So, you have to make it as simple as possible for your listener or your audience to engage with your brand, your podcast, your TV show, whatever it is, right? It has to be really seamless and easy. Cliff, I want to go back to something you said, podcasts being 2 times as trusting. I think that's the kind of the stat. Why is that? Like, can you dive a little bit deeper into the why?
I think that, when you have a friend and you really get to know a friend and you get to hear your friend's life, their stories, you hear about their kids, and you just develop this person's real, they're authentic. I think that's that authenticity and that bearing your soul. And like, you might know more about the person's podcast that they listen to. They don't know who you are, but you know everything about them because they pour their heart out,
Yeah.
right? So therefore, you just kind of become vulnerable I know this person. And when this person speaks, I have respect for them, and therefore I take their, what they're sharing with me as the real deal and not bull. When people listen to them, it's like they're listening to like a trusted friend. And I think one of the things that our CEO, Bob Pittman, who was also the founder of MTV, who's been legendary in media, when he describes it best, it's like everybody wants a companion. They wanna
Mm,
feel like there's somebody that they can hang with, and that's what audio does for
yeah,
people. They
yeah,
feel like, "This is my friend." So I think that's where the trust comes in, is that, it's just like I feel like I really know this person. And you go back to newspapers, think about when people would read certain columns in the New York Times. Like they would like this columnist because they love the style of writing, they love their storytelling, and it becomes a ritual. And
yeah,
I think audio in the same way is a ritual where it becomes that habit and something that you feel safe. It's your safe place.
yeah,
And I
for
think
sure.
so I don't know if I'm answering the question the best I could, but I mean, that's my take on it.
No, no, for sure. I think there's there's just a level of like authenticity and unfilteredness that comes with audio, right? You know that the person is just speaking freely in a way. I don't think a lot of the podcasts I listen to, or at least I hope not, right, are edited too much, right? You kind of let the conversation flow. You let sort of, yeah, just kind of you see the way that they think too, right? I think that is like a really beautiful thing about the medium is that you get to see the thought process, right, as they're kind of speaking, or people are sharing and telling their stories rather than something that's highly kind of controlled and edited.
Well, and when you listen to them, again, going back to the one-on-one, you feel like they're talking to you.
Yeah.
You don't think about how many other people might be listening to this because when you're streaming a podcast, that's you. It's on demand. You don't have to listen to it. You want to listen to it, right? Like
Yeah.
you said earlier, you know, you're there because you want to be there. And I think again, you feel like you're the only one listening. And I think there's something endearing about that. But I'll give you an example. Even with radio, we had a morning personality who, after 15 years, lost his dog
Mm.
and had to put his dog down. And he knew that day would one come. But I mean, you were tearing up hearing him talk vulnerably about how he's hurting and how it's like I've lost my best friend. And, you get choked up just thinking about it, but it's like, anybody that was listening to that, I don't care if you have a dog or don't have a dog, it's like he just kind of validated that connection, that unconditional love that you have for a pet that becomes such a part of your life for so many years. I mean, when you think about 14, 15 years of somebody's life, I mean, that's a journey, a big piece of the journey. And, but again, everybody was, connected in a way with that person because it was so real and so vulnerable. And I think that's really the key of anyone who does audio to be able to break through and make that connection with somebody is a skill set.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the people that are the most successful, and those are the people that brands gravitate to.
If we look at if what's kind of the advice, right? If we're looking at a brand who, you're part of the marketing department of a brand and you really want to step into audio, whether that is creating your own podcasts, or again running, audio advertisements, what's kind of the advice or the roadmap plan, right? That you can kind of give a little bit of the high level first steps.
Well, I always equate it to being having a lemonade stand in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Everybody wants to find that lemonade stand, but if they don't know it's there, they don't know it's there.
Mm,
So when you have the best podcasts in the world, you know, the biggest mistake that publishers or podcasts make is they don't have a distribution plan and they expect people are just going to find them. Or they don't put a lot of effort. They put so much effort into the content of this podcast, right? They don't market it. And the best way to market a podcast is in another podcast. So
yep.
that's why we are in the podcast marketing world because you already have someone who is a habitual serial podcast listener. And now you're telling me to listen to this podcast. If you like this one, you'll love this one. And it's so easy to go ahead and, as you know, as a podcast listener, to pick up a brand new podcast, especially if that host is talking about it, that they listen to it, you're going to, be interested in listening. So, what we try to do is, and I guess I can give you an example of maybe Marriott, something we did with Marriott. But during the pandemic, when people weren't traveling, that was a real problem for the travel industry,
Yeah.
like it was in so many industries. But, they came out with a podcast called, About the Journey,
Mm.
and the podcast was, basically road trips that were two-hour road trips that, to ease yourself back into travel that you could do, whether it be Yellowstone or whether it be in New England. But basically, these were podcasts that you didn't have to fly, trips you didn't have to fly to go on this trip, that you could do it safely within your car in a two-hour radius. So what we did is we came up with a plan to just market it to those people who could logistically do that drive, who were in that area, right? That two-hour drive area, but more importantly, that based on what the adventure was about in the podcast, target people based on their psychographical cohorts. So the one for Yellowstone, not only did we target people that were in a two-hour area to drive to Yellowstone, but we were reaching people that love the outdoors.
Mm.
Through all of our data, we were able to establish that these people, they drive Subarus, they love the outdoor, and they love rock climbing, they love hiking, and we were able to really hone in on the people that would be most likely to have the wherewithal to do the trip, but also would have the interest in doing that trip. So, we did that in, 5 different parts of the United States by just segmenting and targeting audience that way, so that they would get people to listen to their podcast. Because nobody's gonna be listening to it on the East Coast when they know there's no way they're getting over to Yellowstone,
Right.
during this time. So, that was just one case study, one example of how we were able to use the power of data and the power of, having, you know, the right content to the right people based on
Yeah.
who they are and their habits.
Yeah. I
So,
think
yeah.
I think you bring up really important point. Even when we look at video, right? I think it's the distribution strategy, right? We think so much about the content and what we're producing it, who's involved, and then sometimes the distribution strategy. And when we're talking about, say, like social or for particularly brand communications, brand storytelling, sometimes the distribution is not as well thought out, right? In regards to how are we reaching our audience, or even is the audience, right? Like you said, like, making sure that you understand like the segments and, what people's kind of hobby psychographics interests are.
Yeah, we have developed, cohorts of behavior. So, we've identified these lookalikes or soundalikes,
Yeah.
where if somebody says that, "I wanna reach this very health conscious audience," we have or out like I mentioned, outdoors, we have a cohort called Explorer, and that basically is a person that loves adventure, loves to learn new things, that kind of thing. We have one for techies. We have one for Hispanic moms. So we have these built cohorts, psychographic cohorts that really define an audience type that is our go-to for specific brands, and verticals, that we know that they have a higher propensity, to care. Because at the end of the day, you don't, lack of a better word, you don't wanna fall on deaf ears. You wanna
Yeah.
fall on people that really are interested in, and the funny thing about podcast advertising is it's so far and few between the ads. It's pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll. So you're not being inundated with ads. But let's just say somebody finds the skip button, which
Mm.
some people know where it is. It doesn't count as an impression against the brand. If someone doesn't fully listen to the audio spot, it is not counted as an impression. So
Mm,
they never you never lose something. There's only a 10% skip through rate. That means 90% are listening.
interesting.
Other streaming, if you think about other streaming services, you pay extra money not to hear the ads. Well,
Yeah,
that's not helping a brand, right? But we believe that by having advertising tastefully, in a podcast, and we try to make them sound like they belong there. We don't have, like, lots of music and sound effects and, like something that it would sound like on the radio. It's a whole
yeah,
different audience. It's spoken word. So therefore, we want all of the commercials to the best of our ability to be spoken word, that it becomes more like a story than some kind of fancy high produced creative spot. Because, it's just like when you think about social media platforms, you can't do the same thing on Instagram that you're doing on Facebook.
for
And,
sure.
you have to, or TikTok, you have to use each platform for what it's known for. Same thing goes with, the podcast environment. You run different kind of creative on streaming, which is more like music and radio than you would in a podcast environment. But because of who the person is listening, there's a very high chance that because of the data we're using, that this person would be interested in what the ad is, because 'cause we've done our homework.
Yeah.
So therefore, there's less of a put off, by people, and again, because it's not back-to-back commercials
Yeah.
that
It's
last
less
longer than a minute.
interruption.
Yeah, it's nice, and firsthand when you have commercials in your podcast and you tolerate it, but sometimes, you say, "Wow, I didn't know that. I'm gonna check that out."
Yeah.
So the advertising really does work. Now you can put a pixel in a podcast ad
Mm,
that we use cross-platform, attribution so that we know that that person listening to that podcast came to your website because
nice.
they heard you on a podcast. So we one thing we didn't really touch on is that with the technology and the science behind, analytics, we can really, show complete transparency on how a podcast campaign is performing.
Mm. No, that's really great. Because attribution has always been an issue, right? In well, really the marketing world, right? How do you attribute the dollars of, say, a X million-dollar commercial? So be able to do that with the technology that's out there now with audio, I think it just builds the business case for marketers to invest in audio.
I thought I'd share a quick story with you about when I was a little kid, how my mother used to open up the mail, and she used to do it over a trash can, and I would see my mom throw away unopened mail, just one after the other, just throw it in the trash, and I used to go, Mom, you didn't even open it," and she would say, "I don't know who they are."
Mm,
And it was kind of always stuck with me that if people don't feel a comfort with you, or that your brand, or they really don't know who you are, they're not gonna click. They're gonna gloss right over it. But if you're in their head and they've heard of you before, there's a higher likelihood that they might give it a shot, or
yeah,
at least open the email. And it's so true today of how people do that. So a lot of times when it comes to getting credit, there's always this fight between digital and traditional about who really made it happen,
yeah,
because it's always the last click attribution. So everybody would say, our social media is killing it. It's killing it. And the social media team will take complete credit for it. But the only reason they even bothered with it is because they've been hearing you in a podcast, or,
yeah,
in some form of radio or something. So, but it's very hard to get credit for those people that do that. But it makes perfect sense when you think about how all boats rise with the tide. If there's a comfort level or a familiarity, or you're in the consideration set,
yeah.
and you're thinking about that brand.
Yeah, that's why I mean it's important for I think C-suite to consider that all storytelling in all parts of the funnel matters, right? And that's what drives um, that click, right? And like brands should invest in all types of storytelling versus only investing in again just like the conversion stuff that they're doing.
90, 97% of all decision makers in business listen to podcasts because they love to learn,
Yeah.
they love to be in the know, and they're busy. And if they can get a podcast in, much more easier than sitting down and watching television. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
easy. They're traveling, right? So if we want to reach the C-suite, we have a cohort for reaching the C-suite. So these are individuals that are in a C-suite at their companies or on a board of an organization. But it's amazing when you think about it. People would never think, "Wow, I want to." They say, "Oh, I have to advertise in the Wall Street Journal," but they wouldn't think unless you really brought it to their attention how valuable it is to reach someone in the C-suite in their favorite podcast.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, all like I just all in our company, even all director level folks listen to a ton of podcasts. It's just what we love to do. So Cliff, I mean, to kind of wrap things up, where do you what's sort of next, right? In this industry, what do you see is kind of to look out for, as well as maybe some disruptors.
Well, I mean, podcasts. What's starting to happen, that Malcolm Gladwell, who by the way is we do all Malcolm's podcasts, one of the smartest men there is, best authors, right? Tipping point. You talk about when something becomes in a tipping point, which is what's happened. This now podcasting has become a mass medium
Mm-hmm.
very quickly, very quickly. Over 160 million people consuming podcasts in the country and growing every day. So you've got this tipping point that you've reached where now people are telling people as they would with it, seeing a Netflix series, what are you binging? Now people are saying, what podcasts are you listening to? It's become like part of conversation. So I think that the evolution and the growth and the trajectory of podcasts are just going up and up and up and up. What's starting to happen is these podcast hosts are becoming celebrities.
Yeah.
And what iHeart came out with the first ever podcast awards that we do every year, and we give out awards just like music awards to these podcast public hosts and creators. But what's also evolving is live events. So there are now people, and I'm sure if your favorite podcast was having a live event in your town, you'd buy a ticket. And they
Yeah,
would
you
do a
check it
live
out.
episode. They do a live episode. So that's really emerging. That these are becoming now events of real, true conversation in real time right in front of your eyes. Like almost like when you went to go see, the Jimmy Kimmel show and you see it being taped. There's something
Yeah.
exciting about that. So I think that's happening. I think you're going to continue to see more genres of podcasts. Yeah, I think you're going to see more fragmentation under different genres of podcasts. So if you just went into the iHeart app, for instance, or your favorite app, and you just go in there and you start doing a deep dive into wellness, you'll see it's fractioning off to all these deeper
Yeah.
branches, you
Yeah.
know? So you can really get in it's getting to the point where, like, when you think back to magazines, how they have magazines on fishing, but they'd have one on just fly fishing, and they have
Mhm.
another one on, deep sea fishing. So I think you're gonna see these podcasts spawn off other podcasts
Yeah.
and go deeper and deeper. But I do think that it's for those that you don't listen to podcasts. I think it's just a matter of time. They're not early adopters, but if they have enough people, remember back in the day when Sen says, "I'll fax you something," and you used to say, "Oh, I don't have a fax machine." Then, 3 people tell you, "Oh, I'll fax it to you." You go out and buy one.
Yeah, yeah.
Now they don't even exist practically. But what I think is gonna happen with podcasting is that it's gonna become just eventually people are just gonna look at you and you're not gonna be in the conversation.
Mm.
When people say, what podcast do you listen to?" And you go,
Yeah.
You don't want to be that person. You want to be somebody that has something to contribute and also bring purpose, more meaning and purpose and
Yeah.
learning, to your life.
Yeah. No, that's super great, Cliff. I think it's kind of looking at, how many these, again, these micro segments, right? These sort of um maybe cultural channels, right? Specific channels of specific topics. So there's just so much more to come in the podcast space. And I think for brands, there's so much opportunity to tap into that. So Cliff, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to have you.
Lydia, it was an honor. I'm so glad you and I are becoming friends. We'll be in touch.
Thanks for tuning into the Audience Connection podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect with me about how I can help you tell better stories and connect better with your audiences, drop me a note, lydia@casualfilms.com. We'll be back with more episodes soon. See you next time.